The locals will tell you this is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It's seen empires rise and fall, invaders come and go. And here in the heart of the old city is where Maya Mamabashi is building one of the first boutique hotels in Damascus. Old Damascene courtyard homes are now rare commodities. After years of neglect, these are now in hot demand.
What's special about them is every house has a history. Every house has family who lived there, and there is no house which is exactly the same like the other.
It took Mrs. Mamabashi years to find a house that someone was willing to sell. She spent 2 years remodeling it, fastidiously replicating ancient techniques of building and craftsmanship.
هذا بده طب من فوق حتى يسكر عليه كمان.
Incredibly, much of the internal artwork remained intact. These frescoes are nearly 200 years old.
It is the only house in Damascus which has Christian frescoes. So you have the Virgin Mary and the angel here. You have the Christ here with the Bible open. And a part of that, it's a very Rococo style.
Transforming this building is a way of preserving Syrian craftsmanship and history. But it also represents something far more important, a belief that Syria is changing, opening up to the West following decades of repression. After all, if you're going to build a hotel catering to foreign tourists, you have to believe they're going to come.
We are not at all the figure that the media is giving from us. I mean, everybody who comes here are always surprised and wants to come back again and again.
But that's not a widely held view outside the country. The United States accuses Syria of providing shelter and free passage to Iraqi radicals and international terrorists. This while repressing political freedom at home. Just as in Iraq, the cult of the leader has been all-encompassing. Some say Hafez al-Assad was Saddam's equivalent. Since his death 5 years ago, his Western-educated son Bashar has been president. The roots of totalitarian rule run deep, but Syrian society is changing ever so slowly, according to the government in Damascus.
Well, I think there's something in the air that hopefully shows that the atmosphere is improving between the United States and Syria. But from our side, from the Syrian side, we have always worked for a good relationship with the United States. And I really do not believe that there is any good reason for our relations not to be good.
The alleys of the old city are full of monuments illuminating Damascus's tumultuous history. It's this rich history Syrians like Maya want the rest of the world to embrace. But others are drawn here for a very different side to this complex nation. In a Damascus suburb, Omar and his wife Fatima take a ride up the holy mountain to join other members of their Naqshbandi Sufi sect in prayer. It's a low-key gathering. Practitioners of Islamic mysticism were once persecuted. But in Syria today, they found a measure of religious tolerance. Twice a week, the Naqshbandi Sufis come together in a vigorous chanting session known as a zikr. Omar was a New York filmmaker. His real name is James McConnell. He converted 15 years ago. Invoking God's name, the chanting rises to a crescendo. It's an emotional process which binds diverse backgrounds.
I'm still learning to try and use my right hand for food, but I'm a left-hander, a chronic left-hander.
The Sufis here are all foreign converts to Islam who've ignored the advice of their governments to travel here.
When we first came here, you had to really be affiliated with a university, a school, or you had to work as an English teacher.
Omar calls himself a patriotic American and says his faith teaches him not to criticize his government or country. Even so, he believes the neglect of spirituality causes many of the world's current problems.
There's very, very little humility left in the world. We have to understand that we're nothing. We're absolutely nothing. And it's our egos that are driving us towards this animal behavior today. There's cats everywhere, but the dogs tend to stay up on the mountains and people tend to be
Khadija is a relatively new convert. She's formerly Susanna from Mullumbimby, northern New South Wales.
And my family in Australia said, please don't go to Syria. You know, it's not safe. We all know it's not safe. And I've been here for a month and I have never felt safer. I have never felt in more sacred a place. I had to take the leap.
Her family had difficulty coming to terms with her conversion. Like many Australians, she said, they were ignorant of Islam.
Because they haven't had the correct information, and there's been a lot of propaganda, negative propaganda, especially since 9/11, and fear, you know, changes people, sadly enough, fear and ignorance.
But for Syrians, fear and uncertainty have long been a part of life. Syrians are still subject to state of emergency laws limiting their freedom of speech. On the surface, many say they're content, but others say repression and persecution are still the order of the day. We met two recent university graduates to talk about their lives and expectations. They didn't want their identities revealed.
You can't speak about political things. I mean, they captured or they arrested many of students recently because of politics.
يعني هذا الكلام نحن فينا نحكيه مثل ما قلت سابقا يمكن مع أصدقائنا وبنحكي أكثر من هيك بكتير وبنفصل بالتحليل للوضع بس وحتى الحكومة نفسها والسلطة نفسها بتعرف هذا الحكي كمان للأسف بس ما فينا نحكي قدام كاميرا لأنه يعني بيكون هذا الشيء بالنسبة للسلطة هو معاداة.
Why do you fear to speak openly? Do you think something could happen?
A lot. I mean, if I am more courageous, maybe I will risk my life. But I have brothers, I have mother, I have sisters, I have family. So it's not just only to risk your life. I mean, if I am very courageous, but I'm not.
Others, like retired philosophy professor Sadiq Al-Azam, are equally pessimistic. His family once governed Damascus, and so he's able to criticize the regime and get away with it.
The best case scenario for me is that if the Syrian regime itself slowly leads the movement towards greater opening, more civil liberties, more freedoms, and so on. But there are all sorts of good intentions around expressed, but we haven't seen much of it really.
In Syria, history often repeats itself. Here, the last of an age-old breed of storytellers, or hakawati, recounts tales of Arab heroism when Muslim armies battled the Crusaders. The sword comes down to cut off the head of an enemy. The story resonates well with the audience because it has a familiar ring. Syrians believe their world is under siege by the might of George W. Bush and his modern crusaders. And their government is adept at deflecting criticism about the level of repression.
The so-called war on terrorism is causing other occupation of countries in the region, causing more violence, causing more terrorism, causing more chaos actually in our region.
But for Professor Sadiq Al-Azam, the battle of wills with George W. Bush over his war on terrorism has simply become an excuse to delay real reforms at home.
These pressures become a pretext for saying, look, the ship of state is under siege. We are in stormy sea. It's a rough patch. How can you ask us to, introduce such changes? Lift martial law and things like that. So it becomes part of the internal debate.
For President Bashar al-Assad, balancing the conflicting demands will be as tough as anything the ancient capital has faced in its 3,000-year history. Yet history suggests Damascus will survive this onslaught by its critics, just as it has survived others.